Welcome back to another episode of the Our View Podcast. I'm your host, Arthur Aston, and as promised, I am today's guest. Today, I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the news stories over the last few months that have caught my eye, as they have involved people with disabilities. And all three of these stories actually have to do with the travel and airline industries. So I wanted to start off by sharing a few statistics that help set the scene for the stories that I'm about to share. So according to the U.S. Department of Transportation report from August of 2022, the airlines that were a part of this study, they reported checking 68,229 wheelchairs and scooters. And out of that number, 1,145 were mishandled in some way. That is a higher rate from when they did the report in May of 2022. And it is also higher than the rate of mishandled wheelchairs and scooters from a pre-pandemic study that took place in June of 2019. For the second quarter of 2022, the airline carriers posted a mishandling wheelchair and scooter rate of 1.52%, which is lower than the second quarter of 2019, which was 1.62%. Also from the same report, the department received a total of 177 disability-related complaints, which is up from 158 disability-related complaints that were received in May of 2022, and 70 complaints that were received pre-pandemic in June of 2019. For the first 6 months of 2022, the department received 886 disability-related complaints, which is up from a total of 474 filed complaints during the first 6 months of 2021. I bring up these statistics because within the last few months, there were 3 stories that I saw that came across my Instagram timeline that involved travelers who have disabilities and the wild and unimaginable things that have happened to them and their mobility devices as they were traveling. My goal for this podcast is always to share the real life experiences of those who live with disabilities, myself included. And sometimes, as the saying goes, it's not always rainbows and butterflies. A lot of times I have run into situations that are just not fair, just not right, that nobody should have to put up with. And I will now share 3 stories of situations that happened over the summer, real life stories that are documented that have happened to 3 individuals who have disabilities when they were traveling. So the first story I came across this summer was about Mayan Ziv, and Mayan is from Canada. She and I have never met in person, but our paths have crossed virtually a few times over the last 2 years while on the Clubhouse app, which is the easiest way to explain Clubhouse is like it is a giant podcast. So you have different rooms that have different topics, and instead of typing your answers and having conversations through type, you actually use your voice to have conversations about the topic of the room. So it's pretty much like the AOL chat rooms from the early 90s, the mid 90s. But instead of typing, you actually talk through the conversation with the other people in the room. So Mayan and I would often be in the same room with different disability topics, and we've had different conversations, but I've never met her in person. So she shared her story of traveling from Canada to another country for a speaking engagement that she had, and the airline broke her customized motorized wheelchair. And finally, it's starting to, things are starting to improve for my aunt and this story. And after 3 months, the airline has agreed to pay for a new customized motorized chair for her. But it took almost 3 months to do that. And originally, they only offered her a voucher as if they had lost her luggage or something. So she had to really fight and advocate for herself in order to get them to approve for paying for a new wheelchair for her. The next story I would like to share is a story from another content creator named Jennie Berry. And earlier this fall, she shared her experience of the mistreatment she faced on a recent airline. Jennie is paralyzed from the waist down, and like my aunt, she also depends on a wheelchair for her mobility. The airplane that she was traveling on did not have an aisle chair on board, and the aisle chair is a small chair with wheels, a smaller wheelchair, if you will, that is used to help passengers with mobility disabilities board the aircraft. And it also helps them get back to their wheelchair whenever the plane lands. In her story, Jennie shared that the crew denied giving her a seat that was toward the front of the aircraft, even though that there were seats that remained empty on the flight that were closer to the door. And because of the lack of having an aisle chair on board, when she had to use the restroom, Jennie had to crawl down the aisle on her behind and scoot her way to the lavatory. And this is just another example of the horrible way that the airlines treat people with disabilities, and that is just not right. And like my aunt, Jennie had shared her story on social media and got the attention of a lot of different people, and the airlines that they both traveled on, they were engaging in some type of conversations in news stories. But this really just proves that things really do need to change. It also proves that people with disabilities travel. We like going places. We enjoy going places, just like everyone else. And we need to have more of these conversations that allow us to express our opinions about what would improve the accessibility of travel and would make it easier for those of us with disabilities to travel. The last story I would like to share about others who have experienced travel nightmares, I will say, in the last few months that caught my attention is about Cory Lee. So Cory and we actually met in person back in April at the Abilities Expo that was here in New Jersey. It's a traveling expo that travels around the country, different major cities, and they have it in New Jersey, right outside of New York City, not too far from New York City, every year at least. And Cory was there. And it was great to meet him in person. And a little spoiler alert, Cory will be a guest on an upcoming episode of the Our View podcast in January 2023. We actually filmed this episode before he had his experience that he also posted on his Instagram page, where the airline refused to bring his wheelchair to the door of the airplane. They are supposed to bring your wheelchair as close to the door as they can possibly get it. And then if you need the use of the aisle chair to get from your seat to the door of the airplane, they will provide the aisle chair for you. And they were refusing to bring Cory's actual wheelchair to the door of the airplane. And he and his mother, they were threatened with getting, airport police or air marshals or someone who the stewardess, the airline flight attendant, said that she would be calling the airport police and that they would be coming with their guns to force them off of the airplane. All because Cory is not able to sit in an aisle chair for a long period of time because he needs the support that his customized chair provides for him because of his disability. And he was just making sure that his chair was going to be at the door and that he would not have to sit in the aisle chair for an extended period of time while they, removed his chair from under the airplane and brought it up to the door. So, again, I share these stories just because things really have to change. I have experienced my own situation with airlines that none really got as far as any of these experiences have gotten, but it still wasn't right. And I think for me, the big thing that I noticed that I feel from my own one-person perspective is that the pilots, the flight attendants, they don't think that people with disabilities will speak up and defend themselves. One of the experiences that I had was I was returning from a trip from Los Angeles to Philadelphia, and it was raining outside, and the door of the airplane was low to the ground for some reason. I don't remember why. It was a pretty big airplane, but they could not line up the jetway to the door of the airplane. The jetway would not reach down that low. So to get off of the airplane, you had to walk down the metal steps of the airplane and then up the metal steps onto the jetway and walk into the airport. On a good dry day, I could not do this most likely because of the width of the steps. I need a lot more space than the typical person because of my crutches to walk up and down steps. I can walk up and down steps. I have 5 steps to get into my apartment every day. So I am able to walk up steps, but being that it was raining and the steps are metal, that was not going to work for me. So I refused to do that. The pilot became very upset and told me that he has to go and he has to get home, but he had another flight the next morning, and he was not allowed to leave until all the passengers were off of the airplane. And I politely told him then he needs to figure out a better solution for me. He wanted to tell me how so many other people that had canes and an elderly gentleman had done this who were on the same flight as me. They walked down the steps and up the steps with no problem. And I, again, told him, that's not me. They are not me, and you cannot compare me. You will not compare me to what other people have done. I know my limitations, and I don't feel safe doing this. So, and I also made him aware, and the flight crew that stayed on the plane as well, I was home. I could sit there all night if I needed to. But they had to figure out a solution that would work, that was safe for me to do. And eventually, after about 25 or 30 minutes or so, they did figure out a solution. They got the cart that brings up the snacks and everything that they load onto the airplane. They got that for me. So I walked off of the airplane with my crutches and stood on that cart that was lowered down to the door of the airplane, and they raised it up to the jetway. And I was able to get into my wheelchair on the jetway and then proceed to the baggage claim area and to leave. So I think it's really a big, I share all of these stories, including my own, just to, again, raise the awareness and change the way that people see those of us who live with disabilities. We can and we will stand up for ourselves. We will advocate for ourselves. We need to see more changes in the travel world. It has come a long way, yes, as they say. A lot of things have come a long way, and there is still a long way to go. So I really want to, have this conversation and share these stories with you all, just so that you are aware that the one or two stories you may see on the news or you may read about online, they are actually real. They are happening to real people, and people are truly impacted by this. The three people that I mentioned, they all have customized wheelchairs. They all have customized wheelchairs that are specific for them to meet their needs the needs that they have for their disability. And it doesn't work that they can just be put into any standard wheelchair that you may be able to rent from a medical supply store or get from a hospital. So when these wheelchairs are damaged, it really does impact the person's life. It just doesn't mean that they have to stay in the house and they can't get out of the house for a while. Their whole life can change because of the way that they are now sitting, and they don't have that support from the wheelchair that they're used to. So it's something that I wanted to talk about and share with you all who listen to the podcast, and just to bring it to your awareness and to make you aware of the things that are happening, that hopefully we can start seeing some changes, and also to get the stories out of these three individuals who have experienced these things. And this is just over the last few months, I would say, since June and July, and it's the middle of December right now. So it's really not that much of a time span that has passed, but there are these situations that keep happening to individuals with disabilities. So, those of you who may be listening in the travel world, I would love to have some of you on to talk about your airlines and what you all are doing to help make these things better. To anyone who is listening with a disability who has had their own experience with traveling and having their mobility devices damaged, or you just have a story you would like to share, please feel free to reach out to me. I would love to share your story on the podcast. And for the three stories that I mentioned, you can definitely follow Mayan on Instagram, and she can be found at MayanZiv. That's MAAYANZIV_. And Jennie can be found at Wheelie Good Life. That's WHEELIE_GOOD_LIFE. And Cory Lee can be found at Curb Free with Cory Lee. That's CURBFREEWITHCORYLEE. And as always, you can follow me on all social media platforms at Our View for Life, OURVIEW, 4, LIFE. I look forward to sharing more stories with you all and raising awareness about disabilities and changing the tone of conversation about those who live with disabilities. I hope you all have a great day and a great holiday season. We will be back with brand new episodes on January 9th. Enjoy your time with your family and take care. This concludes this episode of the Our View podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on our YouTube channel. You can also follow us on all social media platforms at Our View for Life. That's OURVIEW, 4, LIFE. If you have a topic or a person, or if you are a person who would like to be interviewed for an upcoming episode of the podcast, send us a DM on Instagram, send us a message on Facebook, or you can email me at ourviewforlife@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.